right, so once again, my name's Whitney Jenkins. I'm the training coordinator for the Division of Coastal Management. I have led many grant proposals. I've been a team member on several grant proposals. I've reviewed proposals for NIFWIF before, to be one of the subject matter experts that reviews proposals. I've hosted a lot of grant writing workshops, and I had an intern a couple years ago that helped me put together much of the grant writing information I'm going to be presenting today. So I feel like I've got a little bit of experience with grant writing, and I'm sure y'all have experience with grant writing as well. And so we can try to make this more of a two-way dialogue versus just a top-down type of presentation. I would like to know how experienced you are with grant writing. So if you feel like you're an expert, raise your hand. You've had part of many proposals that have received funding. You feel like you got grant writing down. Okay, we got one. Okay, how about two? You're intermediate. You've had some experience, maybe had a proposal here or there, maybe got some rejection, okay? And how about you have very limited experience, you have some basic concepts, okay? And then how about nothing, never experienced? Okay, so we've got a wide range. We've got some experts and we got some novices out there. So there's two ways that you can go about grant writing. One is effective program planning, and the other is chasing the dollar. And we've heard a little bit about this today, and I'm sure you can probably think which is the more successful approach. So one way is chasing the dollar. It's we find a funding source, we're going to read the RFP, we're going to submit a proposal, and we're going to repeat. And that may or may not be successful for you. But perhaps a better way is to think about what is your organizational plan and capacity? What are your problems you're trying to solve? What is a project that can solve your problems? What are the funding sources out there that are applicable to solving your problem? I'm going to read the RFP, and then I'm going to create a proposal and repeat. And a really excellent example of this is that community flood print that both the town of Princeville and the town of Pollocksville did in partnership with the North Carolina State University Coastal Design Lab. So they really thought about what their problems were, designed projects, and then they referenced that plan over and over in their grant proposals, and that's what made them so successful. So we're going to walk through each of these ideas here today. So I'm sorry, I just had to Google grant writing memes when I was putting this presentation together. Just try to get you to laugh a little bit today. Okay, so organizational plan. Do you have a strategic plan? Do you have a management plan? Do you have a comprehensive plan? Do you have a land use plan? Do you have any of these sort of documents that talk about what the vision is for your organization, your mission, your goals, those sorts of things? Do you folks have things like that you can reference? Or maybe other plans, resilience plans? I think about the Resilient Communities Program and how you do vulnerability assessments and think about your portfolio. Those are all things to rely on for your grant writing. And a lot of times in these plans, you're going to have text that's already written that you can insert right into your grant proposal. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you write a new proposal. Did y'all watch Always Sunny in Philadelphia? Here's Charlie Day. He's trying to explain to funders how your missions are aligned. Freaking out there, I think. You indicated that you had some organizational plans that can justify your project. What are some of those plans that y'all have? Just holler them out. Land use plan. Pedestrian plan, transportation plan. Stormwater management plans, capital improvement plans. Hazard mitigation plans. Strategic plans. My organization has a management plan we update every 5 years. Great. So you already have those documents, and use those documents to guide your identification of problems. And then another big thing, and we've talked about this a lot today, is what is my organization's capacity? And think about this before you take on external funding, right? Because we know that there's a lot of money out there, but it takes a lot of work to apply for that funding and then manage those projects. So think about who's the project lead that will foster communication with the project team and ensure deliverables are met, that the funding is properly spent, and deadlines are kept, right? So you need a leader. What staff will support project implementation and decision making? Who's your core team? And try not to make that team too big, right? Leave your core decision makers to maybe like 2, 3, 4 people. Who will manage the budget, pay the invoice, and handle any subcontracts you might have? Does your project require a technical expert? Do you have those folks on staff? Do you need to partner with somebody? Are those people eligible for funding through the funding source you might be using? And then, do you need to engage the public or work with your local citizens for outreach needs or anything like that? And do you have those folks on staff, or do you need to find a partner to help you with that as well? And when writing your proposal, if you make a detailed plan of who's going to do what and when, it's really going to set you up for success if you're awarded for funding, because everybody's going to know their role in the project. All right, so next up is identification of a problem. And we saw that really nicely in the community flood prints from Princeville and Pollocksville. And then if you're part of the Resilient Communities programs, you've probably done some work with vulnerability assessments and worked on a project portfolio. And then there's also regionally identified needs in the RISE program portfolios that you can also reference. So you may have started identifying a problem prior to today, or when you started working on that grant project planning worksheet. That's one way to start working on a problem and identifying it. And then also reference existing plans in your proposal, and you all mentioned a bunch of them: land use plans, watershed restoration plans, any sort of strategic document. And also think about bigger plans like the North Carolina Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan, or the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan, you know, if you're planning something on a shoreline and protecting habitat. So think about not just what you have, but what other organizations might have to justify the case for your funding. All right, so what problems are you trying to solve through external funding? You shout them out. Sewer issues. Flooding, stormwater management. Infrastructure, so like bridges, roads, water, sewer, all of the above. Flood-prone housing, yeah. Somebody. Downtown revitalization, yep, great. Anything else? All right. So when you're working on a grant proposal, you need to give yourself time. And I know that time is precious, but when you think about designing a project, you're going to spend probably 80% of your time in preparation, research, planning, coordination. And the other 20% approximately will be actually writing the proposal. So the 80% of your time, researching your budget, planning your timeline and deliverables, coordination with staff and partners. And then working with partners, getting early feedback from those folks is important, from those colleagues and collaborators, especially for people who might benefit or be the end users of your project, creating that buy-in and support for your project. I was talking to Rachel over there. She manages the DCM, Division of Coastal Management Public Access Program. And she says that when folks put in their plan that they've had a community session and they have community buy-in, or they have an access plan for their community, they're more likely to award them funding because they've thought strategically about their project and they've gotten community and end user buy-in in the project. So this preparation will set you up for success by creating a clear path forward. And then of course the other 20% of your time is translating all that work into your proposal. So often there's not a lot of time between when you hear about a request for a proposal coming out and when there's a due date. But a lot of these grants run on cycles, meaning they come out at about the same time every year. So if you start working on your project and you can't meet that first deadline, likely that grant may come out again in a year or so and you'll be ready for it the next time. So just keep that in mind. I don't remember about all the funding sources up here. Some of this might be more like one-time money, but just keep in mind that many of these are revolving proposal or RFPs. Do y'all ever feel like you're herding cats? That's my daily job, is herding cats. And certainly working with partners and collaborators is going to feel like herding cats, especially if you are the project lead. So just keep that in mind and be patient and give people time. Okay, so I collaborate with partners all the time, and I was just kind of thinking about what are some of those best practices when you're working with folks. Use a shared space for collaboration like Google Drive, Microsoft SharePoint. There's also something called Basecamp. That's an online portal for documents and things. Make sure roles and expectations of your project team are very clear. You're the project lead. You are our budget contact. You are the one working with partners. You are in charge of the public outreach. Use meeting polls. Y'all ever use Doodle or when to meet polls to gather people? It's a real effective way to set up meetings and not have to send a lot of emails around to schedule a meeting. And then we've all been working virtually for 3 years now, but virtual meetings can make collaboration a little bit easier. Do y'all have any other best practices when you collaborate with others on a project? Follow through. That's a great point, right? When you end a meeting, you've got action items. Leave 5-10 minutes on the end of your meeting agenda for action items and make sure people know who's doing what. Excellent. Next steps, exactly. Okay, this is what we need to do in the next little while to accomplish this proposal. Rachel. Deadlines, yep. We need this by this day, and you're the one responsible. Yeah. Excellent. All right, so next step on here is we've got our idea, our problem, we're thinking about our project, and now we need to research funding sources. So obviously what we're doing today at the forum is one way to research funding sources. And I think someone mentioned this website before earlier today, but the Division of Coastal Management's Resilient Coastal Communities program has put together this website, and it's got all of these different funding sources on there. So this email is this link will come to you in an email after the forum so you can find it. But I just Googled Resilience Funding North Carolina and this popped up. So there's other ways to find funding, but you've heard a lot about them today, and then as you get to work with folks, you'll learn about more funding sources, but really sometimes just an internet search will help you find applicable funding sources. Okay, so once we are ready to look, once we find a funding source, we are going to analyze the request for proposals, or RFP. So hopefully you don't feel like this guy. But seriously, chances are any questions that you have are going to be in that request for proposals. They'll be answered in there, and including if your organization is eligible and if your project is eligible for funding. And then when you reach out to the program funding manager, your questions will be very targeted because you've read that RFP a couple times, and they'll know that you read the RFP and they'll be more willing to support you because they aren't feeling like herding cats, right? They feel like you're informed and you're prepared to take on this proposal. And I heard it a bunch of times today. These folks' job is to give you money, is to hand it out. They want good proposals. They want you to succeed. So don't hesitate reaching out to those funding program managers. And think of them as a collaborator like you would any other partner on your project, someone that you can bounce ideas off of. I'm thinking of this. Is this eligible? Have you seen people do this before? Because if you do get funding from that agency, that program manager will be a collaborator because they're going to see your project through and see their funds used as you described. All right, so next up we're going to talk about creating your proposal. So what tools or strategies do you use when you begin to write a proposal? Make an outline. What do you use to base your outline off of? Yeah, right. So what's in the RFP, right? So take those things in the RFP and make those an outline and then start sticking in your boilerplate text, start citing those relevant strategic plans and watershed restoration plans, all those good things in there. What else do you use to begin to write a proposal? Send it out to review, yeah. So having that shared collaborative space where everybody can work together, like Google Drive. Rachel? Yes, who's been funded before? What kind of projects are they funding, right? Does my project look like it's something that they have funded in the past? Anything else? A glass of wine can help. Sometimes I need to take a walk and think about my project. I do that all the time. Like I'm having a mental block on this project. I'm gonna go take a walk, and that really helps. Sometimes that gets the wheels turning and I come to a breakthrough on something. All right, so some other ideas I had were recycle relevant content you have written in the past. It's very possible that this is not the first time you're trying to fund this project or the first time you've had some type of communication or outreach about your project. So is there relevant content somewhere else that you can just tuck into your outline? Have a brainstorming session with your project team to get ideas. Create a narrative of the vision of the project to use when communicating with partners or creating buy-in with end users. I find all the time that we're all like, oh, this is a great project and we need to get these people involved and I need to communicate with them. But then you're like constantly rewriting the same email, right, to those people with the same information. So as a project team, come up with that narrative so you can streamline your communication with partners and collaborators. We mentioned this earlier, break the application down by sections found in the request for proposals and use as an outline to begin your proposal writing process. And then create a task timeline to ensure everything gets accomplished by the deadline, including who's responsible for each task. And then make sure, usually you want to work backwards, right? The RFP is due on this day, and then I'm going to make my timeline backwards, right? So your timing lines up for the due date. And then as you work through the process, start creating a list of questions, things that you need to answer, because you may not have time to get all those questions answered right when they come to you. But if you start sort of a shared document, you can start putting your questions in there, questions for partners, questions for collaborators, and questions for the funding agency. All right, so letters of support. Have you all done letters of support for past projects before? Yeah, no? Okay. So does it make sense to do a letter of support? So letters of support usually come from folks who may be getting funding as a subcontract in your proposal. They might be a partner that's providing in-kind services to your proposal. Or they may not be listed as the project lead or something like that. Or they might be listed as a project partner in the narrative. But it's a way to justify their participation to the funder. It's like a letter of commitment they're making to your project and to show the funder that, yes, I've spoken to these people and they are on board with the project. So they could come from partners, collaborators, or end users. Even if you had a community member who would be affected by the change that would come of your project in a positive way, even a letter of support for them could be very powerful. And what I like to do is provide a template for them to customize. So who the letter's addressed to, if there's a specific person that the proposal is going to, dear Mr. Jenkins, something like that. And then add a little bit of a summary of the project title, but be sure to give room in there for folks to customize the letter, because I made the mistake of making a template too good one time and every single letter of support looked the same. So you need to kind of like highlight areas, like I need you to add your organization's name here, a sentence about your organization, and a sentence how this project will benefit you. All right, so budget. The budget is a very important piece of your proposal because it shows the funder exactly what their money will be used for. And I know we had some comments earlier today about things running way over and some solutions to deal with that. But budgeting is very important because the funder needs to know what you're going to be doing with their money. And then it's a good thing if you're going to storyboard your project, like we talked earlier, link the budget to your storyboard. We've got X money for phase 1. We've got X money for phase 2. We need X money, and these could be estimates, but it's a starting point. And use as specific costs as possible. Don't make numbers up. So a couple years ago, I helped my son's middle school write a grant to get a concession stand and restrooms funded on their athletic fields. There was just a porta potty on athletic fields. And years past, the booster club just said, oh, I think it's going to cost about $25,000 to build this, without any research in the budget numbers. And it turns out it cost $77,000. So their project was completely ruined, and thankfully it was a local funder, and they were very generous, and they allowed them to repurpose that money for other needs for the athletics program. But what they did was they went back and they worked with an engineer who actually did the drawings and cost out the project, so that when I came in and wrote the grant this time, I had very specific numbers. I padded those numbers, and I made sure to include everything I could think of. Okay, we're building a concession stand. We're gonna need a refrigerator for drinks, and a hot dog cooker, and a popcorn machine, and we're gonna need paper towel dispensers, right? Try to think of every little thing that you could possibly need, and try to make those numbers as specific as possible. And then think about that inflation point that we were talking about earlier. Like, how could these costs go up, and what's prior experience do you have with those inflation costs? What about matching funds? I think we heard earlier someone requires an 80-20 match. So you get 80%, and then you have to furnish the other 20%. So find out that information. That's going to be in your RFP. Are there restrictions on the type of match? You know, you can't use federal dollars to match this grant, or you can't, you know, there might be some kind of restriction on what kind of money you can match your grant with. Is in-kind match allowed? So in-kind match is non-cash contribution of value such as personnel, time, or services. So it's not actual money, but it's something that is, you can put a dollar amount on. So for example, if you're a local government doing a construction project and you use equipment owned by the town and public works staff to complete the project, that's in-kind match. And you can put a dollar amount on how many hours the public works staff are gonna work, and then how many hours you're going to use that equipment, and what is like the hourly rate of that equipment. And so you can calculate a value. So for example, we just did a grant project where we're doing an engagement project, and it was only a $50,000 grant, but we had 4 of us who have a lot of experience in facilitation as project leads. And so we calculated how many hours we were going to spend on the project, gave ourselves an hourly rate, and then calculated how much match that would be. Now, match wasn't required for that grant, but what that showed was our commitment to the project. And our match ended up being almost the same amount of money that we were getting in the grant. So it's a good way to show the value, and don't undervalue your staff's time or the equipment or things that you're contributing to the project. Eligible expenses. Not everything that you might want to fund in your project may be eligible, and this is where storyboarding may come in. So make sure the expenses you want are eligible within the grant, and if they're not, think about what other funding sources you could leverage to cover those costs. And then, so you'll have probably a budget table. A lot of times, the funder will provide a table where you can put your budget numbers in, but you're also usually going to have a budget narrative where you break down the line items of your budget and you explain. So we have $2,000 in travel for this project, and then in your budget narrative, you're going to break down that travel. So we've got 5 people traveling to this many conferences. This is the rate that we're using for travel. So you're justifying all of those expenses and writing it out. And then you can also add, if there's any in that budget narrative, any of that in-kind match, and explain that, as well as if there's other funding sources that are helping you. So for example, in that Pollexville community flood print, they had a $40,000 donation for grant writing. So you can say we've already leveraged $40,000 to help with this project. So it shows that you are already receiving investments in your project, and you're going to build on those investments with this new money coming in. And then because you might have your budget numbers in many places, you might have them in your budget table and you might have them in your narrative, it's really important to double check or triple check that all your numbers match. And usually what I'll do is I'll build my budget in the template or the table that they give me, and then I'll put placeholders in the actual narrative. Like we said the total cost of this project is $46,000. But we're going to highlight that and go back later and make sure that that's actually what our budget table says, right? So you don't want to have any discrepancies between your numbers so the funders know that you're thinking about all of these things and you're connecting the dots. Let me get back up. I did found a really good resource on budgeting, and I'm going to put that link in the email that goes out later. It was, let me find it, The Ultimate Guide to Grant Proposal Budgets. I thought it was a really good resource. So I'm going to share that with y'all after the fact. All right, so now we're going to talk about assembling and polishing our budgets, or our proposals. So again, the RFP is going to be your ultimate resource for what your proposal should look like, especially about things like little details like page formatting and page limits, like it's only 10 pages. It needs to be in Times New Roman font, 12-point font, 1-inch margins. All those little details might seem trivial, but it's going to prove to the funder that you have taken the time to follow their directions, and that if you can follow the directions to put together a great grant proposal, you're going to be able to implement that project and be successful. So all these little details are important. Sometimes they'll give you a checklist. The funders will give you a checklist of required elements for your proposal. Not all of them do, but some of them do. So just use every tool that you have available. Don't discount that checklist. Make sure you look at that and see how you can use it to the best of your abilities to be successful. Let's see. This is important. So once assembled, see if someone will read the proposal cover to cover. Ideally, someone who may not know a lot about your project and wasn't involved in writing the project. Because when your proposal goes to an external reviewer, they're going to be in a similar boat, right? They're not going to know, they wouldn't have been in all your meetings about planning the project. So having an outside person read it and flag anything that doesn't make sense or maybe isn't clear is real important. And then be mindful about internal review deadlines for approving the proposal or the budget. So I work for the state. My budget people say we need a good solid draft with a good solid draft budget 2 weeks before your due date because we need to account for that internally. So be sure you know what your internal or your organization's internal deadlines are, because you don't want to get to a day before the proposal's due and your budget officer says, well, I'm sorry, I need a week to review this, and then you can't submit your proposal, right, because you've missed the deadline. So just be clear on what those internal deadlines are. All right, so what is an intangible quality of a good grant proposal? That is something that isn't explicitly mentioned in the RFP. Any ideas? Concise and direct, yes. Yeah. Link it to your community identity and how it will make things better in your community. Evoke emotion, right? Give them a reason to care. Right. Right. Make sure that your project is relevant to the funder. That was that align your missions, right? Yeah, excellent. So it's not expected that all of these sort of intangible qualities will be in a proposal. And that's also one of the benefits of working with a project team, is that everybody's going to bring different qualities to your project that will helpfully fulfill a lot of these things. So a clear vision that connects the organization's goals to the funding priorities. Know the funder. That's what we're doing today. Get to know the funder so that you can make sure what their priorities are. Even if they're in the RFP, you hear it again when you know them, that you make that connection. Stay organized and delegate strategically. Know the field and explain how team members are qualified to lead this project. So sometimes you even provide a little narrative of each project team member and what their, a summary of their qualifications to get this work done so that the funder knows that you've got a team that can see this project to the end. Be technologically savvy in both writing your application, because a lot of times you have to upload your application online and submit it online, but also in your project approach. Are you using appropriate and up-to-date technology when implementing your project? Write clearly and concisely. Practice integrity in your budget preparation, right? Doing that important research to make your budget numbers as accurate as possible. Keep up with the news. Make sure what you're doing and the terms that you're using are the most up-to-date. So I think about how we used to use the word sustainable all the time, and now we're using the word resilience all the time. So keep in tune with what's happening and what's in the news. Demonstrate passion. I think someone mentioned that about, evoke emotion. Make them want to care about your project, your community, and what you're trying to do. Demonstrate collaboration. And show potential for sustainability of your organization to complete the tasks outlined in the proposal. So if you've been awarded funding before, you can reference, hey, we've been very successful, we've done these projects, we've seen them to the end, we accomplished our goals. If you haven't been funded before, I'm sure you have other projects or team members have other projects that have been seen through the end and been successful. Reference those so that they know you're qualified to see the project through. And then I'll go through this clear writing checklist quickly because I think we are running out of time. So read what you write aloud to catch clumsy language. I do this all the time when I practice a presentation just to make sure that it sounds right as I'm saying it. Avoid slang and imprecise terminology, including contractions and jargon. Spell out acronyms the first time you use them, and then use that acronym, use it consistently. That is one of my pet peeves, as you call the agent, I'm working with Wildlife Resources Commission, and then I don't define the acronym, and then I use WRC later, and make sure you're consistent. Don't exaggerate. Use appropriate statistics and facts. Don't just say it, have citations to back you up. Don't show, don't tell. Back up your assertions with citations and specific data and facts. Have a grammar, thesaurus, and dictionary references available for use. Those are all in Word, Microsoft Word. It's so easy to right-click and, thesaurus and such. Use the active voice. So, for example, during phase 1, we will design the living shoreline. That's putting the power in you. We are designing the living shoreline. Instead of, during phase 1, a living shoreline will be designed. So it gives you the power and you the credit for the action. Limit adjective use and overuse. Less is more. Same with being concise. Say precisely what you mean. Ask someone else to read your proposal. We mentioned that. And then there's this great resource called The Elements of Style. You can find a cheap copy of this or even a PDF online. If you don't have a lot of experience with writing, this can be a great resource. And then finally, don't give up. We all get rejection. I'm sure we've all been rejected before. I certainly have. And if your proposal doesn't get funded, someone mentioned this earlier today, get the reviewers' comments because they're going to spell out exactly what they thought you didn't do right. And then have a debrief with your project team and review those and figure out what you can do next time. And then if you don't get funded, you've got this proposal in hand and you can reuse it for the next time. So it's not like everything you've done is for naught. You've got this already written out and you can use it again. And then hopefully you all get money. So thanks, y'all. Is there any questions I can help answer? Yes, ma'am.